This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The Memphis City Council on tax incentives, pensions, and more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by Harold Collins from the Memphis City Council. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Also Lee Harris of the Memphis City Council and newly elected state senator. Thanks for being here.
Good morning.
Also Bill Dries from the Memphis Daily News. Thanks very much for being here. Let's start with Graceland, okay? And also, although that's been passed and is now moving on to the state, it kind of frames the whole conversation we've had with you, other city council people, county commission people, about the city and county's appropriate role with development and with projects. So why don't, it's in your district, the Graceland proposal was a big one. Why don't you describe it from your point of view? I think you obviously were in favor of this plan.
Absolutely.
I know, Lee, you voted against it. And again, we'll move into the fairgrounds is up next and other projects that are on deck right now. But go ahead and talk about the positives as you saw it, why the city got involved in this.
Well, the positives are, as I see them, the second most visited tourist home in the country. 600,000 visitors a year, $170 million economic impact. It is in a predominantly African-American middle-class community that has been, I guess we could say, the stable of inner city life, the standard bearer. And so for 30 or so plus years, it has had a mass exodus of the economy, the business sector. A lot of the restaurants have left to go either south to South Haven, Horn Lake, or east to Hacks Cross. But that predominantly African-American community has stayed together, have paid taxes. Elvis and Graceland Enterprises have been constant with their impact. And so for them to come to the city and ask the city to allow them to use the TDZ that's only for the 120-acre property of Graceland, the TIF, whereby the real property will be taxed, and as a matter of fact, we would get still 50% of the taxes on that TIF. And then the 5-cent surcharge for extra taxes they have paid for the debt. It seemed to me that people who visit Graceland, 95% of them from outside of Shelby County, 25% of them from outside of the continental United States. And so those are the people who would utilize the services, utilize the benefits, help pay for this, not the city. Graceland has said they will stand behind the incentives, stand behind the bond payments. And so I thought it was a win-win, and that's why I supported it.
And just logistically for people, I mean, we talk a lot about incentives here and TDZs and TIFs. I'm going to say the TDZ, in my simplistic terms, and you all correct me, that in part is intended to say that the sales tax money that we all pay when we're in Shelby County or Memphis, wherever, most of which goes up to Nashville, to the state government, instead, and then maybe comes back in whatever form, it's instead diverted to help pay for this project, correct?
Absolutely.
And then that's the intent.
Absolutely.
Part of the debate has been about whether that is really how it works and whether that money comes out of education and so on. That's the TDZ.
But let me make sure that education money will stay here. The education money does not go to Nashville. In that TDZ, it is designed where the money for Shelby County schools will stay in Memphis. So we don't have to worry about that.
And TDZs, unlike when we talk about pilots, that Memphis uses pilots much more than the rest of the state, TDZs are used quite frequently. I think Knoxville has 10 or a dozen of them. I think Nashville has quite a few of them. A TIF, let's just distinguish a TIF from a TDZ real quick. A TIF is?
Tax increment financing.
Okay.
This increment financing is on the real property around or on the Graceland property.
Okay.
So when they build the $95 million hotel,
right,
that increment financing would help pay for the hotel building. But 50% of the real property taxes will still flow to Memphis and Shelby County.
So is it fair to say it's a tax break on new construction to help fund that new construction?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. And then there's a 5% surcharge on spending in there that is a tourism surcharge.
Absolutely.
You voted against the proposal. Why?
So first of all, tax incentives and so forth are here to stay. And so I'm not against them. It would be stupid for me to rail against them. I voted in favor of the Chisco Hotel project, Crosstown project, Overton Square, and other projects. Some projects I wasn't persuaded by, and this was one of them that I wasn't persuaded by. I've said that we've got to have incentive programs, but we've got to show some common sense. And that means we've got to learn from our mistakes, like in the case of Cargill. We've got to learn from our mistakes. And in addition to that, we've got to set some reasonable parameters for evaluating these programs. So there are 3 reasonable parameters right now that I think through. One of them is that if we're going to do a public-private partnership, we've got to have a private partner. With respect to this project, Elvis Presley Enterprise is the best private partner I can think of for a project like this, but a private partner also has got to ante up, put something in the game. And I didn't feel like they were putting enough skin in the game, and that usually we want to see leverage. You know, Crosstown, by comparison, we put in $15 million. We got private investment to the tune of, upwards of over $150 million. And I could go on and on. Other thing is, we've got to negotiate right now the way city government is structured. There's no negotiation. We saw that with AutoZone Park, which I voted against. City government is not, we don't negotiate. We don't know how to negotiate. We don't have a person to negotiate. If we're going to do a public-private partnership, it is reasonable to say we have to negotiate the terms of that partnership. And we've got to be leery of long-term commitments.
This is a 30-year commitment. Is that right?
It's
20 years. 20 years.
Decades-long commitment.
Okay.
I mean, you before the show, you mentioned Beale Street Landing. That was a great development project, but a fiasco when it came to the long-term entanglement that we were under with Proforma or whatever the developers was called at that time.
Right.
And we're still facing the negative consequences of that long-term entanglement now.
You mean the Beale Street Entertainment District?
Yeah, Beale Street
Beale Street
Entertainment District. The point was we entered into a long-term obligation which future city councils are going to have to deal with, and future city councils are going to have to deal with the fact that we don't have access to our hotel motel anymore, that we won't have access to
in that district.
We don't have access to hotel motel anywhere.
Okay.
We could build 1,000 hotel rooms every year, and that hotel motel tax is not going to fix a pothole. It's not going to pave a street because a past city council has already segregated those funds, and now that these funds are segregated, future city council won't be able to use these. So the point is. We've got to, I'm not against them. I am for some of them. Harold has voted against some. He's voted for some.
Right.
We all come to these things, from different perspectives, but we've got to use some common sense and set up reasonable parameters, and we've got to negotiate.
So had they come back with X amount more in private investment, you'd have been on board?
If they would have come back with any private investment of note.
What is it?
Then it would have been worth discussing.
10 million is the stated amount that they're putting in, and there's about 78 million. The total of the various financing you talked about is around 75, 80 million.
The total of the various numbers, when you combine them over a 20-year period, is about $77 million.
Okay.
They're putting in about $10 million worth of land use. Okay. And so while I agree with Lee, and again, it goes back to the AutoZone project, the council, when we're dealing with these things, we're not in a negotiation mode. We can't negotiate with them. That should be an administrative mode, and we've seen that time after time after time.
Right.
But now, having said that, it still may be time for us to go back and talk to Graceland and say, listen, you've heard what some of the people are saying. What is it can you help us do along the boulevard? Now, we've got commitments from them to help recruit and sustain other businesses along the boulevard because we know that the hotel, the restaurants, and all their amenities will not be able to sustain an estimated 1.2 million people when this all thing is done. So there has to be some more development on the street. Right. And they've committed to help us bring in these new kinds of developments. And so it might be that they could help us provide restoration along the boulevard, better signage, better lighting. Who knows what happens to this project going forward?
Okay. Let's get Bill.
Lee, isn't Elvis Presley Enterprises also on the hook if the revenue streams in the TDZ and the TIF don't meet the mark?
Well, that's what I hear, but I don't know if that is credible. I mean, based on the structure I've seen with respect to other agreements, I don't know the details of this one, but I would be suspicious of that. I have heard that, but the way they pencil these things out, there is more than enough revenue to go around and to cover the bonds and so forth. And when things fail, in my experience, the city of Memphis tends to be on the hook. For example, AutoZone Park, that has failed, and the city of Memphis has been on the hook. So whether or not there is some out for the city of Memphis in that contractual language is one thing. I don't know if there is, but even if there is an out, contractually speaking, the city of Memphis is gonna make this project work, and we're gonna be committed to pay for this project no matter what. Once we're involved, and we are involved here. And so if we're gonna be involved, let's be reasonable. I mean, I think Harold is right about this, is that we're not negotiating at all, and the city council is gonna have to take a more aggressive stance, and we're gonna have to be the point of negotiation at this point. And we haven't been, and the only way to do that is for us to add some sort of financial advice to our repertoire. We've got a legal advisor. We're going to have a financial advisor, because we're going to see more and more and more of these projects, and we don't have any kind of advice about when to proceed. You know, we don't have negotiation on the part of the administration. You know, or at least there's some examples of failures to negotiate. And we are not currently in a position to negotiate, because I don't know much about these projects in detail, right? This is the real weeds. And we need some financial advice with our legal advice that is independent, that we can trust, to tell us whether or not to green light these deals or not.
Harold, is there, I don't want to call it an evolution, but is there a difference between the Graceland project and what you all saw with AutoZone? Is there some indication here that maybe the AutoZone experience influenced the structure of this?
Absolutely. When AutoZone was presented to us at the 12th hour, we had to purchase it. There was no other plan, or they were going to sell it to this venture capital people. We were on the hook. There was no buy-in from the Cardinals. There was no shared responsibility. We were even renovating the stadium as part of the plan. But with Graceland, as you said, they stand behind the bonds. While I understand Lee's suspicion, but they have said they will stand behind the bonds if the revenue streams don't flow. Let's make it very clear here. We're talking about a industry that just alone on the city of Memphis side, $170 million impact. Imagine what they do revenue stream going forward. And I make no bones about it. Graceland in Whitehaven is very important. They bring a lot of people into that small area. Imagine what it will look like after this particular venture is completed. And it's been estimated that in 10 years, this particular project will bring $1 billion worth of revenue impact.
Versus about 170 to 180 million now, currently.
Correct.
I think was the
And
estimate.
I don't disagree with the fact that you can spend public resources to generate economic activity. I think that is clear. Like you can spend $1 all day long and generate economic activity. The question is, for a city council, is whether or not we're spending public resources and that's going to grow our tax receipts. And so far, tax incentive programs have not grown our tax receipts. They're going in the opposite directions. Our tax incentive programs are going up and becoming stronger and more frequent, whereas our tax receipts are going down and our budget struggles are becoming more serious over time. So they're going in the opposite direction.
I agree with that, but the issue is, I think, is the strategy behind the tax incentives or the relief that we give to these companies. I've been, I'm excited the fact that we're getting a brand new company to come to Memphis with 400 new jobs, but those 400 new jobs may pay $9 an hour.
This is the target distribution center that's going in.
Right.
Yeah.
And so while we have, in my opinion, limited ourselves or corralled ourselves into one pigeonhole strategy of bringing in a whole bunch of jobs that pay very little wages for people to sustain themselves, instead of going out with a strategy of maybe having the best of both worlds. And so why couldn't we bring in jobs that pay $9 an hour and give those companies the incentives that we do, but also identify some high technical skill manufacturing jobs that pay anywhere between $45,000 and $60,000 a year. And that's why we see a mass exodus of young people who are college educated from Memphis leave, because they don't want to go to college and get a degree or an advanced degree and come back and work in a manufacturing position that only pays them $9 an hour. And so our strategy, it may be a little bit off, but this particular project with Graceland, it totally makes sense. when you can only invest in the inner city, and even though Graceland may be on the outside of the loop, it is in the core city. This would be the first major development project within the core city of Memphis within the last, independently, within the last 30 or 40 years.
It's a fine project. I'm just saying, could it be better? Could it be better?
Absolutely.
That's all. Could we have gotten more? That's all.
Let's say we're talking about incentives. Let's segue into the fairgrounds proposal. And both these proposals with TDZs and TIFs confuse me a little bit. So I'm assuming some viewers would be confused. At the end of the day, it's the State Building Commission that determines what's going to be a TDZ, right?
Right.
But the way the politics work, the localities, as long as if the city council and or county commission is on board, the State Building Commission looks more favorably on that. So Robert Lipscomb of the city has lobbied really hard, and the city administration lobbied really hard for approval, even though it's not technically required. Where is, and I've forgotten, I apologize, where does the city council stand in terms of its support on the fairgrounds? I know the county commission delayed its vote till, help me out, Bill.
January.
Till January. What's the county? What is the city council? Where's their stand on the fairgrounds, and what's your individual stance?
So the fairgrounds, I think the vote the city council took on that predates me. So it happened right before I arrived at city council, and so
Some years ago.
But I've tried to pay attention to the project, and the project is actually my new district and so forth. The short of it is, you got to have, again, set reasonable parameters. If you're going to have a public-private partnership, which this, we imagine it is, you've got to have a private partner.
Right.
Well, there's no private partner in sight.
Right.
So it's
For
a
the fairgrounds, right?
so it's a public-private partnership without a private partner. So that is unreasonable, right? I also said there's another parameter of you want to avoid long-term commitments or at least scrutinize them a little bit. And this is a long-term commitment, so you got to think through that. I've said you got to negotiate. Well, there's nobody to negotiate with because we don't have a partner at all.
Right.
So there should be some caution about this project.
Your take on the fairgrounds as it stands?
As it stands, my take is, and the council did as a whole approve this project several years ago. I think it ought to come back before the council to revisit now. Two things that come to mind. One, the people who live in Cooper Young are against the project.
Yeah.
I don't know if you all get the emails that we get, but we get plenty of emails from people in Cooper Young who say, no, we don't want it. The second part to this is the Madison community, the Madison Street community, has some concerns about the TDZ and what the effect it might have on the investment that's been now placed at the Madison Avenue, the Midtown Overton Square project. And so I'm concerned about those two properties that one, the community doesn't want it, unlike in Whitehaven where the community wanted Graceland to do its job. And then two, the investment along Overton Square and Madison Street, they have some concerns about this TDZ and how it would affect them. And then third, as Lee said, who is going to be responsible for the development of it? And then you hear other people say, what about the Coliseum? Why do you want to tear this down when it could possibly be used for other purposes? And so I think the council needs to have an open dialogue. That's why I think it ought to come back to be revisited by the council.
Do you have any indication that it will?
Well, I think we could do it. It takes 7 votes to bring it back to it, but I think if we put it on the agenda, we could discuss anything, as we all know.
Let's also talk, you mentioned Target has announced this week that they're moving a big distribution center into Memphis. They were looking between Memphis and DeSoto County. Cargill, you talked about Cargill leaving. That was a bad spot. And you talked, and I'll just put this on you, Lee, and also get into you becoming a state senator, where a lot of the definitions, the laws that define how these incentives work are actually state law. So pilots. I mean, you seem to say that we're doing too many of these pilots, that our tax receipts are going down and our incentive kind of giveaways are going up. Am I mischaracterizing?
I said there's reason to believe that there is reason to reform. That's all. I don't know if we're giving too many or too few. The point is that the city council is going to take a more aggressive stance. We're going to need independent financial advice. The way this is laid out right now is there are all sorts of structural defects all over the place. I've told you one of them, city administration. They don't necessarily negotiate in some cases. We've talked about some examples of that. The other real big defect is when it comes to pilot, we rely primarily on EDGE. And EDGE does a great job at doing their job. And their job is to present the upside of every project they can. And so people talk about echo chambers. When they come in, they are all sing from the same hymnal, and they all say this is the best thing on earth. Now, every big decision I've ever faced in my life has some negative consequence. But the big decisions that we face, according to people that present information to us, have no negative consequence. There's nothing but pluses, nothing but upside. And so it strains credibility. It strains, and you have no real way to evaluate it. And so it goes back to, remedy number one, you got to have independent legal advice that is outside of this kind of echo chamber that actually can advise you, hey, here are some negative consequences. Now weigh those against the positive, because you're not going to hear them any other way.
So going up to Nashville now as a state senator, again, most of these incentive programs are defined by state law.
Yeah.
I don't think, everyone, even the EDGE people would say that the pilot program is really flawed. It's just, they would say, and they've been on the show before, it's the toolkit they have, okay? Well, maybe they wouldn't, but I've heard them say words to that effect here. What would you do if you could, go up there and change the law at Nashville? What should be changed to make this a better situation for the city?
All right, so if I could paint on a blank canvas, I would do a whole lot of things differently.
And as a freshman senator in the minority party, you will be able to. So go ahead. Yeah.
I know exactly. Yeah. People are gonna really listen to me. The short of it is, as I've always said before, I'm frightened by government getting involved in private enterprise. That's not the way it should work. Government's responsibility is to lower taxes for all. Right? You don't do specialized tax breaks. You do general tax breaks, because government shouldn't be involved in picking winners and losers. That's unsustainable and likely to fail. We don't have enough public resources to fund private enterprise to make it successful, and we can't decide what private enterprises should be successful. In other words, if you come to us and ask for, if you come to us and ask for money, then and you can't recruit that capital privately, it suggests your business model is probably flawed and may fail. So we shouldn't be involved in it at all.
Yeah,
but this is where we are, and so being here where there's going to be pilots, I got to work on trying to make them work a little bit better, and I've kind of pointed out which directions you go to do that.
Okay. Your take, in terms of these pilot programs, if you're not going to the state senate or to the state house, what would you like to see, though? Here's a local representative. What would you like to see the state do in terms of changes to these programs, if any, to help the city of Memphis and your district and so on?
I would like to see the state make pilots available for smaller businesses.
Yeah.
The Republican mantra is it's the small business people that needs the support, not the big companies, but all we see is the big companies getting the support they need. Why couldn't we develop a law or state law through the pilot program that allows small businesses to redevelop themselves or remodel their businesses or move to a larger place and give them some incentives to do that? We struggle as a community. Keep in mind, again, we go back to, we have an enormous amount of small businesses in our community that are good, but they just need a little help. And if we gave them that little help through pilots or incentives, that might work. And this is something that maybe Lee in the state Senate could help rewrite this pilot legislation to help us.
Some private businesses could be very successful, but they don't have access to capital.
Right.
Small business can be very successful, and that's what we should focus on.
3 minutes, and maybe we go, Bill, to pensions and just get an update on where the council is on that.
You'll be on the council long enough to vote another time, it would seem.
Unless it's delayed, you never know.
Unless it's delayed.
But probably won't be. Yeah.
So it's back on the agenda for this Tuesday. Harold, let me start with you. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I honestly believe there will be a move to separate those who are less than 7 years. I think that seems to have the momentum from the majority of the council. I'm of one of those who says if you are a current employee and you contributed to the pension and the city contributed to your pension, you ought to keep that money. That's just how I feel.
You should not be affected.
You should not be. It should not be affected. Mm-hmm. Or what if we gave those employees who are within that 7.5 year range the option of saying, okay, I'll transfer over for some more incentives that you might give to me as an employee. I just don't think it's right to take the money that an employee has earned during their employment time with the city of Memphis and be taken away by the city through some resolution or ordinance that the city council and the city administration has put forward. I just don't think that's right.
Lee, where do you think the council is going to go on this? Well, what are their 7 votes for?
I can't tell, but I generally agree with what Harold said, and The short of it is that we've come a long way. I mean, the unions now say let's get rid of the pension, or at least they're willing to agree to get rid of the pension. The administration wants to get rid of the pension program. I mean, we've come a long way when people are making those kind of concessions. And the question is now, what do you do about the current employees? And I've always said I'm in favor of 401ks, and I've said that we shouldn't be more harsh than other organizations of our size. And generally, other organizations between 0 and 5 years is
Should
where
it be
they are.
new hires only?
Well, it should be between 0 and 5 years. The changes should be between 0 and 5 years. So
Just
if that makes any sense. Instead of 7 years, what he talked about, between 0 and 5 years.
A minute or so left here. I'll start with you, Harold. Regardless of this plan, do you feel like the vote that you guys are going to take sometime in the next weeks or months puts the city on a long-term, more sustainable path? The whole reason for this was not to, I don't think anyone wanted to punish the employees. They just said, when you look out, the city can't afford this generous pension plan. Do you feel like that you're close to a plan that really does put the city on better financial
Well,
footing?
two things. Number one, the pension is 89% funded.
Right.
The problem is that the city administration or the budgets never paid the ARC. So they're two different things.
Right.
And so the money that they're trying to find is to close the gap with the city of paying the ARC. Let's make sure everybody understands that part.
Right. Okay.
We
real
still
quickly.
have spending problems. I mean, we still got a lot of spending issues. Our CIP budget is pretty bloated and too much spending. We still have revenue issues. We need revenue reform. We've talked about the pilot and how we keep segregating all of our growth and tax receipts. So, we still need revenue reform, still need spending reform.
All right. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.